Hello, welcome to the Incubator, the Biology Jobology podcast. I'm your host, Will Olds, and today we will be joined by Dr. Kendra Taylor, who is the founder of First Immuno-Consulting. First Immuno-Consulting provides market research and strategy planning services to startups, small life science companies, and individual investigators at academic or healthcare institutions. So Kendra, what do you do now? What's a typical day for you?
So my days aren't really that typical because I'm just starting the business. But usually my days include conference calls, meetings, working on projects for clients, and also attending networking events.
So how did you get here? Could you kind of go through how and why you wanted to start your own company?
Yes, absolutely. So I started out doing research. I started out as a postdoc here in Massachusetts at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And there I was doing mostly graft versus host disease research in mice. And then I moved to Mass General, where I studied autoimmune diseases, systemic lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, things like that, in the lab of Shiv Pillai. And then from there, I went through this, this phase of trying to figure out if I wanted to stay, doing bench work and stay in academia, or if I wanted to move out of academia. And I ended up making the decision to move out of academia. And my first job was actually an analyst at Decision Resources Group. And then after that, I went on to become a vice president of business development with WestNet Inc., which is a distributor of life science research supplies. And from there, I figured out sort of this niche market, or I figured out a gap where I could add value. And then that's how I, decided to make that leap to start my business, in a short version of the story.
So you mentioned that you kind of found this niche. How did you kind of determine whether this niche was something that something that you should pursue commercially, that there was enough money to be found in it? Yeah,
and that's a great question, because I think often we have great ideas, but we don't always, really vet the ideas to see if there's really a market, a commercial market, like you said. One of the things in working at WestNet, there was a lot of working between the scientists, the procurement folks, and then also, the vendors. So I got a really good sense of the gaps between the scientists and procurement, the gaps between scientists and vendors, and looking at the needs of basically all three groups of people, or groups of within the organizations, and trying to figure out what their needs were and how could I, as an individual with my skill set, help to meet those needs.
Great. So you have a pretty good scientific background. So how did you learn all those non-scientific parts of running a company, like accounting and whatnot?
I am still learning. I'm still learning. There are things about accounting that I'm learning. I do not have any employees right now, so that makes it a bit easier to manage the finances of my company. And as far as business skills, what we usually define as necessary business skills are not just applicable to business. So things like having great communication skills, problem-solving skills, networking skills, leadership, teamwork, project management, analytics. Those things are common among, many career areas. Just a couple things like sales and financial management, marketing. Those things I don't master, but they are, I think, key parts of it that I was able to learn and sort of understand during my time as VP of Business Development at WestNet. But again, I'm not an expert in marketing, but I understand some key factors so that, if I need to outsource certain marketing work, I can have an intelligent conversation, understand, what I need, and then convey that need to the person that I'm hiring or speaking with.
So that's very reassuring that you don't have to know everything before starting a business.
Absolutely not. It's impossible. And you can't be an expert, in everything. Just because you're starting a business doesn't mean, you have to have expertise in marketing. I think you just need to have a good understanding of your market and do the research to understand that this market, is a market that you can actually, do business in and actually generate revenue. And there's an actual need for your product.
That was kind of general terms, but do you have any suggestions for scientists who are trying to learn these types of things in between pipetting in the lab?
In between pipetting, actually, that's a good point because, and I'll start with this. One of the things that I did was that I started out doing independent consulting while I was still working in the lab, and so that actually gave me, a good sense of sort of testing the waters a little bit while I was still doing my research. And one of the other things I would have to say is also have a clear understanding of why you would want those skills. Is it because, these are just good skills to have, or do you have a purpose? Is your purpose to leave academia and go out there into industry and find a job, as a researcher in industry, as a consultant in industry, or, some other career path, but at least try to have some understanding of why you would want those skills. I think that's important too.
When you were doing this consulting during grad school and your postdoc, were you already kind of in the mindset that academia is not quite for me, or when did that kind of idea come to you?
So the independent consulting was during the postdoc time. Later, much later. This was back probably just a few years ago. So I started the independent consulting in 2013, I believe, 12, 13. And I did it for about a year before I actually left academia. But definitely the thought of leaving academia probably started, maybe the year before that, where I started to contemplate about if I were, wanting to leave academia and what would I do? What would be my career path? There are so many things that one could try to do when leaving academia in terms of industry. And so I started to think about what path I really wanted to take.
And was that path always to kind of start your own business, or was that something that just kind of evolved and came to being later?
Yeah, it definitely evolved. Initially, when I started to think about leaving academia, I started thinking about, just the job. What job did I want to have? What careers did I want to now set up? I started thinking about, leaving academia and doing medical science liaison. I thought about still taking a job, doing research. And I actually at one point before I actually left, I tested the waters a little bit in terms of, going out, putting my resume out, and actually got a couple interviews and things like that. And at that point, I realized that I wasn't giving the interviews my very best, and I realized that it was because I did not want to be at the bench doing research anymore. And so once I came to that realization, it was much easier to determine a different path, because I was sort of going back and forth between being at the bench, not being at the bench. And so when I got the job interview, I think I wasn't really acting like I wanted the job.
Right.
And so I really had to, have a moment with myself to really decide, what is it you want to do, Kendra? And realize that I had to come to grips with I did not want to be at the bench anymore. And I think for many scientists, when you spend so many years of your life doing research and working at the bench, and then you come to realize that you don't want to do that anymore, there's a process in dealing with that. And so once I made that decision, then it became much easier.
So it sounds like there's a little bit of soul searching and discernment
Definitely.
in that process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also there's this kind of like what you touched upon it a little bit, is that you've spent so much time perfecting these certain skills So I think I was just about the best brain gut dissector of fruit flies in the world. Um, Unfortunately, that's not like a marketable skill, and I haven't. I'm a bit rusty now. I don't believe I'm the world's best anymore. But there is like this idea that like, why should I, like almost like a sunk cost fallacy in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So what's been the biggest challenge for you as you've shifted from the bench to industry and then now on to entrepreneurship?
Wow, so that comes in so many levels. I think the biggest challenge for me as a new business owner is probably the financial aspect. You know, the constant thinking about my finances, dealing with my finances, forecasting revenue is really sort of this daily check of my strategy and check of my plan. And that, I think that constant aspect is something that's very new for me. And that's probably the most challenging. You know, as spending so many years as a scientist, there's this internal, I think, spirit of wanting to just do the work and not worry about, you know, the business and, you know, the grants and all of those things. You want to just do your research. So after spending so many years doing that, you know, then now having to constantly think about finances and making sure that I'm forecasting things and you know, worrying about my revenue. And it's a different, definitely a challenge.
What sort of like resources are there available for people to just who want to start a business? Like how did you find out how to do all these things?
It depends on the business. I started my business with my own funds. I did not go out to get funding to start a consulting company. I imagine that for startups or something with like a tangible product, you know, like in healthcare or something like that, there's lots of venture companies and things like that. But I chose to start with my funds because it was just easier for me to do it that way. I had my idea, I vetted my market, and I was ready to go. And so I just started.
And then do you have any like mentors or anyone else that you kind of speak to just get general advice about running a business?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I have several people that I connect with, you know, from time to time, especially in the very beginning. You know, there were many things that I didn't know and I needed to connect with people on. So definitely. Absolutely. Mentors are great. And if they're not a mentor, just even friends, associates that you have a good rapport with, you know, I find that people are always willing to give advice. And so it's just a matter of seeking them for advice and then, you know, making your decision.
So what's the most rewarding and exciting part of your job?
So the most rewarding is that every day I have an opportunity to leverage my skills and experiences, you know, for the benefit of my clients. And so it's that sense of satisfaction at being able to add value to a business. I think the exciting part is that every day I learn something that I didn't know the day before. So always I'm learning, researching something for a client, a different market, you know, or even just the different clients in general and their company background. So it's always learning something I didn't know the day before, and that's pretty exciting.
So how are you finding your clients?
Another good question. So there's my network, and I actually started my business from my network. People that in organizations, companies, people within companies that I've met, you know, during either as a postdoc, during my time working at WestNet, and just using that network to get started. I mean, there's a certain amount of, you know, confidence that some of your closer colleagues will have in you, and so they can actually become one of your first clients and things like that. So that's how I got started. And I'm still working, you know, with my network of colleagues, but also I go to certain events like at Harvard or Harvard Medical School or some of these networking events, biotech, pharma networking events, And there I meet people as well.
So that brings me to kind of an important question here, which is networking. So a lot of scientists describe themselves as, networking challenged. I myself am one of them. So what advice do you have for those people who just lack a little confidence in their networking skills?
First, before attending, let's say, an industry networking event, so outside of academia, pharma, biotech have all of these networking events. Read up on some of the companies and some of the people that might be attending. I think knowledge is always a good way to gain confidence. And if, keep doing that. And then the other thing is to just keep going. I think the more you attend these events, the more you'll find yourself, talking with people and socializing with people and finding out, what they do and see if you have any common interests.
And so it's I'm sure running your own business means you have very little, it's very focused on the work, but how is your work-life balance?
Definitely not balanced right now. And it's something that's important, but being in business for just 6 months, I'm definitely not having a good balance right now. It's more work than having downtime for sure. But I definitely think that finding a balance eventually, is important. And I do try to find, moments of downtime because it's good for your mental and well-being to do that. So definitely it's important. But right now it's all work, not much balance.
All right. So do you have any suggestions for those interested in starting their own businesses?
One of the things I think I talk with people a lot about is getting stuck on your idea. And I would say we always think we have great ideas and we want to just drive that idea, but don't get so stuck on driving the idea that you miss your mark. And what I mean by that is make sure you have the market for your product or for your skill set. Make sure that there's truly a market for you to serve and do business, which means taking the time to do the research, understand the consumers in your market, the competitors in your market, where you would actually, where your skill set or your product would actually fit in that market, and what could potentially be your market share if and when you enter that market. So those are things that I think one should take very seriously before, going down the entire path and spending lots of money and finding out, later that you're not able to sell your product to that, not enough people to generate revenue. So it's a tough question to ask, but it has to be asked early on.
So lastly, what words of encouragement do you have for young scientists?
If you're looking to leave academia, there is a place for you outside of academia if you want it. So don't be discouraged and don't give up. Don't think that the transition is just too big, and understand that the mental transition takes time as well.
Could you expand upon that? That's really interesting.
Yeah, often scientists, when we're in the lab doing research, and we view ourselves as so different from people, in the business world, in the industry world. But the reality is that there's a lot of great scientists out in the business world and the industry world. And so the leap and the transition is not as great as you might think. I think that, there are always going to be things where you need to change and you need to modify, you need to adjust, but that's really transition from any job, right? So I think it's that mental conditioning that, as scientists, we've just been conditioned to think that business is just so different from what we do as scientists. And it is, but in terms of interacting with people, it doesn't have to be that different. We're all people. People are people, whether they're in business, whether in science. And so it's really how you approach interacting with people that helps your transition.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Kendra.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Big thanks again to Kendra and to Protein Tech for sponsoring, and thank you for tuning in. This is the end of this season of the Incubator. Stay tuned for next season, next summer.